You heard me. I said it. The 1% rule is a scam. Fight me. I know not everyone's going to agree with me, but what I can tell you is there are a lot of people out there missing the boat because they're so hung up looking for the 1% rule that, you know what? Fine. If you want to keep looking for that and you're set that you're going to get 1% rule properties, do your thing. But I'm here to tell you, you're going to mess yourself up if that's all you focus on. Okay, let's reel it back a second. What in the world is the 1% rule? Pretty aggressive start if you don't even know what the 1% rule is, huh? 1% rule means that the rental property you are looking at to purchase, potentially, the rent on it, whether estimated or actual, is 1% of the property value or the price. So if it's a $100,000 property, a 1% rule property would mean that it gets $1,000 in rent. The origin of this rule, it actually started with the 2% rule. Back in the crash days, you actually could get properties where the rents were 2% of the purchase price. Those days are long gone. So it's kind of turned into, over the years, the 1% rule. Both of them, same thing, same problems, whichever, doesn't matter. But we're focused on the 1% rule right now. The origin of this and why it came about is somebody out there said, well, if you find a property that meets the 1% rule, it'll be a good rental property from a cash flow perspective. The expenses are less than the income, you'll profit, you'll make positive cash flow every month. Okay, maybe. The 1% rule, I don't know who named it the rule part of that. It's actually a 1% guideline. There's nothing rule about it. Unfortunately, a lot of people have adopted it to be a rule. And that's what I'm here to smash right now because I'm so tired of seeing people completely misanalyze rental properties because of the 1% rule. Okay, so by the way, if you see properties I advertise and I call them 1% rule properties, that's more of a if you can't beat them, just join them. You know what? If people want 1% rule properties and I have access to them, I'm going to let them know it's a 1% rule property, but I'm not going to be happy about it. Just so you know. Okay, so it's actually a guideline, not a rule. And the proper way to use it is to just, as you're searching through properties, if you happen to see something that meets the 1% rule, it's like a quick filter. It's like, oh, I could look further into that one. I should look further into that one. And run the numbers, analyze it, see if it ends up being a property. The suggestion is that if something meets the 1% rule, it should be a decent cash flowing rental property. Cool. Maybe, and in a lot of cases, that is true. But that's what the 1% rule is about and where it came from and how it's supposed to be used. But now I want to tell you the problems with it. And because I don't like to tell you problems without giving you a solution, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do to properly analyze a rental property completely outside of the 1% rule. But first, let's hit those problems. Also, if you already know what the 1% rule is, or even if you're around in the 2% rule days, hit that like button. I'm curious how many people are on this 1% bandwagon, whether you're for it or against it. Leave it in the comments. Let's just crack this bad boy wide open because obviously I have some feelings about it. So let's all talk about it. Okay. Now, the problems with the 1% rule, aside from it's completely misnamed because it's not a rule, it's a guideline, if even that, quite honestly. I'm going to give you 3 problems that I see with it. Number 1, and I have proof of this, I have seen several instances of cash flow that is higher on a non-1% rule property than it is on a 1% rule property. So everyone thinks if it meets the 1% rule, it's going to be the highest cash flow. Not always true, and that's ignorant. Depending on what state you're buying properties in, for example, Alabama has one of the, if not the cheapest property taxes and insurance of any state that I know of. So when you actually run the math on that, the cash flow on some Alabama properties, which don't meet the 1% rule, may be way higher because the expenses are so low. What the 1% rule does not tell you or take into account is the actual expenses. So let's say, this will never happen, but let's say you find a 1% rule property in Texas. Great, sounds good, right? Yay, let's do it. Texas, unlike Alabama, has some of the highest property taxes and insurance rates of all the states. So that 1% rule property suddenly may not even cash flow. So it's a great guideline to kind of help you fish through properties to further check out, but don't stop there. If you don't believe me on the math, I have a video that I'm going to link below where I actually take two properties, a 1% rule property and a non-1% rule property, and I run the numbers real time, and I prove to you that the non-1% rule property has higher cash flow than the 1% rule property. So if you're all hung up on the 1% rule and you just have to have it, I'm assuming that's because you want the highest cash flow. Dude or dudette, you are missing out on higher cash flow potentially because you're so tunnel visioned into the 1% rule. But hey, call me crazy, do what you want. Not my problem. It's not my returns. But I hate to say it this way, you're being ignorant. Sorry. Problem number 2 with the 1% rule. There are multiple profit centers of a rental property. There are 5 to be exact. And if you want to learn more about each one of them, I'll link to that video below also, because they're very good to understand and they're incredibly helpful when you're analyzing properties to buy, because when you understand truly how something profits, you can make better buying decisions. One of those profit centers is cash flow. That's what we're talking about. That's what the 1% rule pertains to. Another profit center in there is appreciation. If you buy a 1% rule property, so for cash flow, and it is in a market, which is very likely, it's in a market that doesn't really get a lot of appreciation potential, there's not a tremendous amount of growth or whatever, it might be a very perfectly good investment, but if you're sacrificing the appreciation or the growth potential of a property over the long run just because you're focused on the 1% rule, I hate to tell you, the millionaires and billionaires of real estate are not that rich from real estate because of the cash flow. They're rich because of all the profit centers working together. So if you're so hung up on the 1% cash flow rule, are you willing to sacrifice all of the appreciation potential? What if you get a just under 1% rule property, but it's in this huge growth area or this great neighborhood and the value of it increases exponentially, both the property value and the rent increases, which that's a whole different Pandora's box, how that ties back to 1% rule. But if there's so much more growth potential on a non-1% rule property, is the 1% rule property really more profitable or worth it? I don't know. And yeah, appreciation speculation, so it can be a little risky. You want to be smart in that evaluation. But hello, appreciation and all those can be way higher than your little 1% cash flow. On that note, the third problem, and the last one that I'm going to hit for this video with the 1% rule, and it kind of ties back to what I was just talking about. People think it's a security blanket. There is something like warm and fuzzy about the 1% rule that just is like, people can be like, okay, I'm good. People, for some reason, don't think anything ever goes wrong with a 1% rule property. Not true. And honestly, 1% rule property versus one that's slightly under, or whatever the mediocre difference in cash flow is, let's say it's $100 a month difference in cash flow, if it's even higher. That's really not going to make the big difference if something major happens to your property. It's just not. So it's the security blanket that I see as being a problem because it makes people too content. It makes them content in their property analysis. It makes them content in thinking nothing could go wrong with their property. And it makes them content thinking, oh, well, as long as I hit the 1% rule, I'm good. It's just not how it works. So I think it's a dangerous security blanket. So now that I have thoroughly trashed the 1% rule, granted, if I see a rental property for sale and it hits the 1% rule, I'm like, oh, I'll look at that more. Again, it's initial. So here's the solution on that note. The way to work the 1% rule, like I just said, is just use it as a preliminary kind of thing. And don't rule something out just because it doesn't hit the 1% rule, but at least you have some kind of like, if it's a $700,000 house renting for $1,000 a month, that is really far from the 1% rule. So you can be like, that's probably not going to cash flow. But if it's $150,000, if it's a 1% rule, it's renting for $1,500. But if it's renting for $1,200, that's not a big deal. And look further into it. That one may cash flow higher than a 1% rule in another market. Don't rule it out. Okay, I went on a tangent there, but here's the solution I promised you. Or, I don't know if solution's the right word, as here's what you need to do as a rental property investor after you throw the 1% rule out the window. Run the actuals. You want to know what the actual cash flow on a property is, and you want to analyze the growth potential, all those things pertaining to the other profit centers. Run the actuals. If you're given a pro forma, there's very little in there that you cannot verify. If you put in estimates for vacancy and maintenance, yeah, you got to kind of guess at that one. But property taxes, insurance, property management, HOA, whatever your expenses are, you can, for the most part, know all of those. Run your numbers. If you don't know how to run the numbers on a rental property, check out my video below called How to Run Rental Property Numbers. It's my hand on a whiteboard. It's super simple, and it's those cash flow equations. That's where this 1% rule comes in. Now, other than you checked out my video, so I proved that a 1% rule property may not cash flow as high as another one. Go find a couple of properties on your own. It's going to be kind of dependent on markets. Some markets allow for the 1% rule to get hit. Great. But if another market doesn't, but it's kind of in the ballpark, run those numbers. Just out of curiosity. Alabama right now, you're probably not going to get 1% rule properties, but that doesn't mean the cash flow won't be higher than the 1%. I'm telling you, learn to think for yourself. The 1% rule has brainwashed people, and it's supporting this idea of you not having to really know what you're doing in order to invest. Stop listening to what everyone's like, you got to do this. Just learn how to actually do it. Don't go off these rules or guidelines or whatever that somebody made up along the lines and let it trick you out of perfectly good deals. Do you agree? Hit the like button. Do you hate me now because I just crushed all your 1% rule hopes and dreams? I mean, I don't know. You can still hit the like button.